Media has tremendous power in setting cultural guidelines and in shaping political discourse. It is essential that news media, along with other institutions, are challenged to be fair and accurate. Questions to ask yourself about newspaper, TV broadcastings, and radio news.
I think I get the most information from Twitter when it comes to news because it allows you to follow different people in the news field, journalists, writers that have really interesting opinions, and you can get news very, very quickly. But you can also get misinformation from all types of people if you're following the wrong.
Simple fact that you get more news based off of what your friends have already known. So whether it was the Newtown shooting or highlights of football games, someone is actually posting something about what's going on in the news.
Most of my news from the New York Times website, and I also read pretty much every day the BBC News website.
Internet.
From lots of different sources. I try to keep a variety. I get news from the radio, from television, from different websites, sometimes print publications.
Probably doesn't have any effect because the media is all fixed and they're just sort of like copycats. So I don't think you get any news from the mainstream media.
I think that social networks allow you to get news very quickly, but it might threaten the credibility of a lot of sources because you don't need any credentials to be on Twitter, and you don't need to be fact-checked when you're on Twitter. So in the case of this recent incident in Sandy Hook, there was a lot of information that came out that a lot of reporters said was accurate from their sources, and it turned out to be completely wrong. So I think it's hard to gauge a source's credibility through social media.
It affects it greatly because it goes back to my last point where you actually start to investigate things that people are interested in as opposed to exposing news that people aren't aware about or something aren't aware of, and informing people of what's going on in the world.
I think that it depends on who you follow. I mean, there's so many people on Twitter that if you use it to follow the people who are credible, then it's really effective. But if you just listen to everybody who's on Twitter, I mean, everyone has an opinion, and a lot of times it's not an educated opinion. It's just saying whatever they want, and they take that as news, which it's not news. So if you follow people who are in the news industry and who are reporting accurate information, then it's a great source. But the problem is, I don't think a lot of people do that.
Well, they have the people hire them. That's what they support. So it's easy. If your employer doesn't care, then you can get away with it. But I think it generally boils down to who watches the news. People are fairly smart, and people can pretty well look and see what they think is biased and what isn't. So ultimately, it's the American public who either is going to watch your news and purchase it or not.
I'm trying to avoid bias by the choices I make for the newspapers I read. So I always think the New York Times suits my opinion, and so I tend to try and cut out bias from my choices of where I get my news. But within stories, how do reporters get away with it? I suppose it's in opinion pieces, in open editorials. I don't think the hard facts or hard facts of news in the columns are too biased. But how do they get away with it? It's their opinion. That's how you get away with it.
Only reporting on the facts that they want to talk about. So they may not necessarily report a whole story. So if you are talking about the president's speech, or you're talking about how a player played a particular game, you're only going to show clips or discuss clips that will help you make your argument as opposed to discussing the entire thing.
It's tough because you just have to sort out, you have to read everything, you have to have some knowledge yourself, and then you have to pick and choose, and you have to look at the individual. Even the internet is very good, but you got to know who's doing it and what it's doing, so you have to have some fundamental facts yourself in order to be able to trust
I think it's like doing bias. I think you have to know what their motive is. So if it's out, I mean, I know newspapers are out to get money, but they're also to promote the news. So if you look at a lot of talk shows, their main goal is just to make a lot of money. So what their motives are, and also by just consuming it. I mean, once you read a paper enough times, you can tell whether it's biased or not. So again, it's just sort of up to you. You have to do the research on. You can't just assume because a lot of people consume it that it's not biased.
Beware the things that news reporters tell you because they aren't always true. You could do your own research to find the news that you want on your own, like CNN, Fox 5, NBC, or Washington Post.